Howdy, folks. I want to welcome you to the Campfire, a place where we can just sit and tell a story or two, and we can ponder on the unusual and mysterious things that occur out here in the wild. I'll tell you some of my stories, and well, you can tell me some of yours. This is Clay Steele. Come join me around the campfire here beneath the stars. Grab a cup of coffee or a cold drink, and let's talk about our stories. Can't wait. Hello everyone, this is Clay Steele again, Campfire Stories. And so, as I'm sitting around here this evening and watching the flames dance around, I wanted to tell you guys about this story here about a backpacking trip. And it was sent in by one of our listeners, somebody that wanted us to tell this story. This is the backpacking trip. You asked us to send in one of our stories, and I figured I'd send this one in. It stretches the boundaries of reality, to be sure. Did it really happen, or was it a figment of our imagination, tucked away in the hidden corners of our minds? I hope you enjoy it. My girl and I decided to go backpacking for a long 3-day weekend. We love the outdoors, and we spend as much time as possible hiking and camping and fishing. Well, it doesn't matter if you're heading out for a day or a week. A trip into the wilderness requires pretty careful planning and a lot of gear. As much as you plan, there's always something that you forget to bring. So we were headed out to the Bridger Range in the Wyoming Wind River Mountain Wilderness area. It's an awesome place. It runs for miles along the Continental Divide, and we've hiked a good portion of it. Well, my girlfriend and I were attending college at MSU in Bozeman. She works at the planetarium part-time and is really into looking at stars and finding obscure constellations. The snow had finally melted enough to get out and see some awesome night skies, and we were looking forward to getting away for a bit. We'd both been studying so hard that we just couldn't find time for a vacation or a getaway. So it was still early in the spring, which means pretty cold mornings and cool afternoons, but we were pretty well prepared for that. We drove to Pinedale and got us a room so we could get a really early head start. We wanted to be at the trailhead by around 9 o'clock. It's about an 11-mile hike into Shadow Lake, and the entire circuit of the Tower Loops is about 24 miles, somewhere in there. We figured we'd do it in about 3 days. The location we were headed to was one of our favorites. You pass by several alpine glacier lakes, and the views are pretty spectacular. The lakes are crystal clear, fed by several glacier runoff streams. There's dense pine and fir forests, opening up to high alpine meadows and towering rock formations. The lake we were headed to is secluded and remote. In other words, absolutely perfect. You never see other backpackers on this trail this early in the season. It was still too cold to draw tourists, and school was still in. If it were later in the year, we would have chosen a more remote location, preferring our privacy over the crowds of yuppie backpackers trying out their brand new gear. We considered ourselves seasoned backpackers, this being our 9th year together as a couple, and we'd put a lot of miles on our backs. The sun shone brightly overhead as we hiked through that breathtaking scenic wilderness. The air was crisp, fragrant, with the sweet scent of the first wild roses of the season. It was a perfect day. So, to get on with my story, the trail still had snow in many places, but we didn't see any tracks coming or going. There were sparse mounds of grass and wildflowers where the sun had warmed up the ground, and we made pretty good time to our final destination for the day, and we set up camp. So Shadow Lake, it was beautiful and serene, and we watched the fish jumping in the lake, trying to get all the mosquitoes and critters they could that hatched. Nightfall came, and we sat by the crackling fire. We were sharing stories and laughing. It was a perfect night, and we felt completely at peace. But later on, as the full moon was rising high in the sky, this strange feeling came over both of us. We felt like we were being watched. You know that feeling. We kept hearing a rustling in the leaves, which normally wouldn't seem unusual. I mean, there's all kinds of little critters that run around at night in the underbrush. But this was different. My girlfriend whispered to me that she was scared, that something wasn't right. So we noticed that the forest had become pretty silent. Then right behind us in the brush and the trees, we thought we heard a growl. And then it sounded like something was running, breaking twigs and such, like an animal running away from something. We figured there must be a wolf or a coyote or maybe even a mountain lion chasing something. but it sounded close, and that alone was pretty scary. So in front of us, between ourselves and the lake, was a small clearing, kind of like a beach of decomposed granite. The moon was so bright that the mica in the granite glittered, and the moonlight illuminated that particular clearing almost like a light was shining on it. So we had pretty good night vision at this point. So we're both sitting in our little folding backpacking chairs as close to the fire as we could get, thinking that the fire would scare away any predators that might be lurking out there. We're both holding our little container of bear spray, which felt pretty minuscule and ridiculous in comparison to what might come at us out of the dark. Once again, I wished I was smart enough to bring my pistol. My girlfriend doesn't like guns, and we'd argued about me carrying one every time we'd ever go anywhere. So I'd fallen out of the habit of packing one. I know that sounds pretty careless and stupid, and looking at it now, I should have just ignored her and packed it in my pack. But nevertheless, our small pocket knives and pocket containers of bear spray was all we had to protect ourselves. So fear gripped at our muscles as we noticed we were being surrounded by glowing yellow eyes. Whatever was out there was keeping a distance away from our fire and moving around in the trees. We strained our eyes trying to see what it is. All you could see was the eyes. And they were not low to the ground like a coyote or a cat would be, but like 4 or 5 feet off the ground. And they glowed. And there was a lot of them. Bears don't travel in packs like that, and besides, they'd have to be standing on their hind legs to be that tall. Now, I know you're not going to believe what I'm telling you next, but both of us saw this, and we weren't doing mushrooms or anything like that. From out of the trees, we both saw this monstrous creature take a step or two out of the shadows. It was unlike anything we'd ever seen in our wildest nightmares. We talked about it later. It appeared to be gliding over the ground with outstretched wings. It had legs, but they barely touched the ground, and the wings seemed to be giving it loft. It had grayish skin. It was about 5 foot tall and had a wingspan of like 8 to 10 feet by my guess. Its head looked elongated, kind of like a bird, but there was no beak. It looked like it had fangs or sharp teeth that kind of shine in the moonlight. It would step out into the light and snarl and then dart back into the trees. It was weird. It did this repeatedly, as if it was trying to scare us away from our fire, you know. So we thought our eyes were playing tricks on us. We knew something unearthly was out there. But now we couldn't see it at all. The creature seemed to have retreated back into the shadow of the trees. And then all of a sudden there was an ear-splitting screech that was followed by more and more screeches, reverberating off the granite rock face on the opposite side of the lake and echoing all around the forest. There was just sounded like a strong wind in the trees, and suddenly a flock of enormous winged beings took to the sky like giant bats and formed a swirling column heading over higher toward the distant peaks, aptly named the Cirque of the Towers. We were frozen in terror as we watched these winged creatures take flight and soar upwards. And then they were gone, just like that. Well, we kept the fire going all night just in case they'd return, but we didn't see or hear them again. Night turned into morning, and we packed up and headed out, continually checking our backs and looking up into the trees to make sure nothing was following us or planning to jump out and attack us. But we never saw sight of them the rest of the trip. Now, like I said, you may not believe my story, but we traded in our backpacks for colorful Hawaiian shirts and flip-flops, and we now spend our vacations in Hawaii. Now, we thought we'd send you this story, Clay, so that you could tell it to your listeners, and maybe somebody out there has a story similar. Well, folks, that's an interesting story. There are many strange things out there, and I've seen a few of them myself, and there's just no explaining some of that. That would be some scary son of a gun. Anyway, y'all have a good story. You send it in and we'll talk about it. Meantime, this is Clay Steele, and I'll talk to y'all later.